Monday marks the first official day when the United States can formally request to leave the Paris Climate Accord. All signs suggest the Trump administration plans on doing that. It's a promise the president has said many times. Mr. Trump first announced his intentions to withdraw from the Obama-era agreement back in 2017. The president and his re-election team do not appear to be making climate change a major talking point on the campaign trail. But not all Republican lawmakers agree with the president's approach. On Tuesday, I asked Republican Senator Mike Braun of Indiana how he hopes to get more of his GOP colleagues interested in climate change.
If a few of us lead on it and articulate it differently than we tried with health care, where we were apologists for a broken industry that's brought most of this on themselves, maybe they'll learn the lesson from that. And until you have new voices, new points of view, I think that's the only way you see problem-solving methods change in the future.
Joining me from Seattle is one of those new voices. Benjamin Backer is the founder of American Conservation Coalition. It's a conservative group that advocates for environmental policies. Benjamin, thanks very much for being with us. Why do you think some Republican lawmakers are reluctant to embrace some of these, what some might consider more progressive environmental policies?
Well, I think a lot of it comes down to having so few climate change policies on the agenda that fit within conservative values. Now, that's the fault of conservatives for not having their own agenda on climate change. But when the only way to address climate change, at least in the mainstream narrative, is to tackle big government and large spending, it's not appealing to conservative lawmakers nor their constituents. That's what our organization is doing at the ACC. We're working on getting this to be a conservative issue with conservative types of policies, and that's how we get more conservatives engaged on this issue.
Well, yeah, so what do you think actually needs to happen for climate change to truly resonate with more conservatives around the country?
Well, we as conservatives need to make it apparent that climate change doesn't have to just follow within the progressive footsteps, that there are conservative types of policies on climate change that can be addressed, that could talk about markets, innovation, economic opportunity, and limited government, not no government, but a limited government approach to these issues. We've done a really poor job of messaging this in the past, and it's led us to this stalemate politically on an issue like climate change, which should be bipartisan, which should be something that both sides come together on. And I'm thankful that it's starting to change within lawmakers today, and a lot of that has to do with some of the pressure that our organization has put on and the base of the conservative movement.
Well, you told the New York Times, quote, "You can be skeptical of climate change all you want, but young people aren't. And there's no way conservatives are going to win elections if we don't deal with climate change." Do you think Republican lawmakers will ultimately have to capitulate to younger Americans who view climate change as a serious threat?
They have to. If climate change is your number one issue, and for many young conservatives or young people in general, it is, there's really no reason to vote Republican until more members speak out about climate change and have their own agenda. So far, the Republican agenda on climate change is very similar to health care, as Senator Braun said. It's just anti-everything. Instead of anti-Obamacare, it's anti-Green New Deal. We have to stop being anti-everything and be for something, be for our own reforms. And people are going to lose elections until that happens. And honestly, as a conservative, they deserve to lose elections until they tackle climate change within the conservative viewpoint.
So according to a CBS News poll, just 20% of Republicans surveyed said climate change was the most important issue to them. Do you believe that more independents would vote Republican if they knew there was a stronger conservative agenda on climate change?
I think so. I mean, as a young American, I'm actually a senior at the University of Washington. There are a lot of young people who don't know where they stand politically, and they're independent as well, and they're turned off by the Republican Party's agenda on climate change. So if Republicans can get this issue right, and I do think we need to move the ball forward in a bipartisan way, but if conservatives can get this issue right, it's going to be very helpful down the road, especially to independents and young people that put this issue near the top of their list, but just don't see the Republican Party being at the forefront of it, which they haven't been. And again, that is starting to change, thankfully.
Well, you have gone on the record in saying the Green New Deal proposed by Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez would not work. Why do you believe that that's the case, and what would an ideal conservative climate policy look like to you?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the Green New Deal is not only not feasible here in the United States, but it's not feasible globally. What I mean by that is it calls for 100% wind and solar energy. And I used a car to drive here that used fossil fuels, and honestly, most of the things that are powered in this studio and probably powered in every studio nationwide are powered by fossil fuels. While we need to decrease our reliance on fossil fuels and decrease emissions from fossil fuels, that is not possible to phase them out overnight. We can't just mandate our way out of climate change. Now, if you look towards internationally, a country like China and India, which are increasing emissions at an astronomical rate, whereas the United States is decreasing our emissions, they're not going to implement a Green New Deal. And then lastly, it's really important to note that the Green New Deal is focused on a lot of negative, a lot of fear, a lot of hopelessness, and a lot of, this is really our only option, otherwise the world's going to end. And the reality is it's really not that simple. This is an issue that we can tackle and that we have time to tackle, but we need to tackle now, and we need to tackle it with all energy sources. We need to work with all countries. We need to work with all industries. And we need to make sure that all Americans and all people globally are lifted up by policies. That is what the type of policy that the conservative approach should be looking towards, is something that's economically feasible, leans on innovation and markets so that we can put our technology abroad, and also uses all types of voices in the conversations. There's obviously more specifics to that, but that's got to be the approach.
Right, Benjamin Backer. Benjamin, thank you very much for sharing your perspective with us.
Thanks so much for having me on.